Is this the secret to Yusuke Murata's art style? One Punch Man, drawn by Murata, is often cited as having one of, if not the best art styles in all of manga. There's just something about the way Murata draws manga that makes it so clean but so detailed at the same time. But how is he able to take a simple character like, say, Saitama and make him look so iconic? Well, I'm sure there's a myriad of reasons why people love the art in One Punch Man, but I've managed to boil it down to 3 things. So in this video, I'd like to examine the 3 ways Murata makes his art stand out from everything else, and why this makes him arguably the best artist in the entire manga industry. A couple of disclaimers before I get started. First, I'm not going to look at the anime and any of the animation techniques for Madhouse or JC staff. Second, be warned that this may contain some spoilers. Finally, whenever I cite a chapter of the manga, I'll be going by the official Viz chapters, not the online chapters or whatever, or the webcomic chapters. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the first thing that stands out to anyone who looks at One Punch Man, the character designs. So, to be fair, Murata doesn't do the original designs. Everything comes from the series creator, One, in his webcomic. That being said, I think it's fair to say Murata contributes more than his fair share to these designs. I mean, you can take any of the random characters in this manga and they look amazing. So much so that if you take them out of context and show them to a casual fan, odds are they'd know it was a One Punch Man character. So how exactly does Murata make his characters look so iconic? Or rather, what is it about his art style that makes it instantly recognizable? Well, to start, I'd actually like to take a quick look outside of One Punch Man, because as I'm sure you know, Murata loves to draw characters from other manga, especially Dragon Ball. And what do you know, he was kind enough to give us a bunch of examples thanks to the iShield 21 anniversary. And I think the first character we should take a look at is Gojo. Okay, so here is Murata's take on Gojo. Now here's Akutami's. So obviously, Murata's is more of a sketch than a full drawing, but even still you can notice there's a clear difference. But here's the kicker. As soon as I ask what the difference actually is, well, that's when people struggle to put it into words. But the difference is actually pretty simple. Akutami's is just more stylized. You can see it in the spiky shapes meant to show the folds in Gojo's jacket, the polygonal shapes that compose his body and hair. Meanwhile, Murata's is much less stylized by comparison. The only thing that you can say is stylized is Gojo's face, which is rounder than Akutami's Gojo. So here the difference seems to be 1, a less stylized body, and 2, Murata's approach to Gojo's face. And the same is true when you look at the opposite end of the spectrum. You look at Murata's take on Luffy, and it's basically the same story. Luffy's body, by comparison, might seem more stylized, but really One Piece is more stylized. Murata's Luffy just has more detail in the body and clothing. And then you look at the face, and it's a more realistic approach than the usual flat look face in One Piece. So again, less stylized, unique face. But this time, we see that one of the key differences is detail, and there's no better example of this than Murata's takes on Dragon Ball. So for this, let's take a look at Dragon Ball Volume 12, and Murata's take on the same volume cover. Now, when you compare the styles, they really aren't all that different. They both have simple characters with rounded out features. The only real difference that you see right away is that Murata's looks more realistic, and he achieves that by adding more detail. His Goku looks much more three-dimensional. There's more of an angled perspective. The cars look much more realistic because of the coloring and shading. So the takeaway from these examples is this. Murata's characters stand out because they have basic designs that are only really stylized in the faces, but are full of detail that make them look realistic. And that's the beauty of his designs and his art style overall, constantly balancing realism and signification, or stylization, while pushing both to their limits. Now, that's the basic rundown of Murata's character designs overall, but there's still a couple of things that stand out about his designs in One Punch Man specifically. But before I get into that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, I already talked about how one of Murata's talents is his attention to detail, but in One Punch Man specifically, it cannot be understated just how detailed his characters are. So for example, let's take a look at everyone's favorite main character, Saitama. Now, Saitama is like the poster boy for what I was talking about before. He's got a really simple design for his face, right? But when Murata isn't drawing him like some meme, Saitama actually gets a lot of detail for his face. Murata will shade it as much as he can to make Saitama's head look like a three-dimensional head instead of just a flat circle. You can see how the eyes and mouth curve around his face in a realistic way. But fundamentally, again, Saitama has a simple design for his face. It's just loaded with detail so that it looks realistic. And this is contrasted with his realistic body, which Murata achieves not just by pure detail alone, but by including realistic anatomy. I'm not saying it's realistic for everyone to look like this, but you look at any page of Saitama when he's all muscly, especially with the shirt off, and you can immediately recognize that Murata has a thorough understanding of what the human body is supposed to look like. Another great example of this is with a character like Mizuki. She's not like a girl from One Piece. She looks exactly like how you would imagine a girl who is a super athlete to look like. She's got small but broad shoulders, a small waist with clearly defined abs, strong-looking arms thanks to the emphasis on her biceps and triceps. It's clear by looking at Mizuki that Murata knows what a skeleton is supposed to look like. He knows how the muscles stretch, compress, and how they attach to each other. And by using this in his designs, he can make an athletic-looking character like Mizuki. And yet, at the same time, she has that simple, rounded out look in her face. Thus, she achieves that iconic Murata look. And this is why Murata is essentially the modern-day Toriyama. Because if this was, say, a Dragon Ball character, she would probably still have some muscles, but she wouldn't be nearly as defined. The way Murata draws this character, she has so much more detail, looks so much more like a real person, and yet still maintains that simple aesthetic like a Dragon Ball character, thanks to Murata's simple yet detailed character designs. And it's not just thanks to his focus on human anatomy. Another highlight of One Punch Man is Murata's detail in objects as well. And for this, I have to talk about Drive Knight, low-key one of my favorite characters. You look at all of his crazy transformations and they look insane because of the detail Murata puts into them. But it's a different kind of detail than human anatomy. Like Toriyama, Murata is a master when it comes to drawing machines and carefully illustrating each part. Like, you look at his Knight transformation and you can see all the carefully drawn parts in his chest and legs. You can see all the joints and bolts. You look at his motorcycle form and you can see everything down to the brakes on the wheels. He just looks so freaking cool, and it's because his transformations are so intricately designed. And this is true for all the clothes, weapons, machines, or any objects in One Punch Man for that matter. It makes the world look beautiful, but more importantly, it makes characters like Drive Knight look amazing. And because of this, you get a wide array of different designs, from cyborgs to muscly girls to tiny girls that can destroy a city at the wave of a hand. Now, at this point, I've gone on and on about the character designs, so I think it's about time we talk about everyone's other favorite part of One Punch Man, the action. Now, before I talk about what I like, let me just point out something, and this is probably a hot take, but generally speaking, Murata's paneling really isn't anything special. All in all, it just works. The action flows well, but there's really nothing special about the actual panels and how they connect. That being said, Murata's skill is more in the department of choreography, and for good reason. For example, let's look at this page of Saitama punching Boros. There's two things that stand out about this punch right away. First is power. You can see the power of this punch from both sides. From behind the punch in all of Saitama's musculature, and in front of the punch as it bullets its way through Boros. The other thing you notice after that is speed. You back away and you look at the whole panel and you can see that the punch blurs everything around it, showing you just how faster this punch is than everything else. So you have strength and speed. So really what stands out about this panel is the physics behind the punch. Too often in manga you see a punch or a kick and there's like an aura or like a recoil, but it still feels kind of flat. But in One Punch Man, everything has physics. Punches, kicks, jumps, dashes, everything has an action and reaction, and because of that, the action is visceral. You can feel each movement just by looking at it because of the way Murata illustrates the impact of each action. Now, he also supplements these physics with plenty of detail. So for example, if you look at Genos and Drive Knight in chapter 136, you get this awesome double spread of them teaming up against Psychos. And there's a ton of detail. Aside from the obvious element of the detail in the character designs, you also have the little sparks from the sword clashing. You have all the sparks coming from Genos, the blurring of the sparks that gives them this aura and electric feeling. You can see every detail of this clash. Another example in the same chapter comes from Atomic Samurai. Here, in another great double spread, he's using his Atomic Straight Slash. Again, loaded with detail. The slicing up of Psychos, all the splattering, the veins in Atomic Samurai's arms, showing you that he's swinging with everything he has. So in addition to the physics that Murata portrays, he also supplements that with plenty of detail to enhance a simple punch or slash to an attack that leaves almost nothing to the imagination, showing readers everything he possibly can about this attack. He also does this through something much more subtle yet right in your face. Body expression. Body expression is so important because it's the difference between a character doing a lame jab and a character throwing the world's strongest punch. And it adds that much more personality to the fights. And while there's a lot of great examples, two great characters to look at for this are Garo and Bang. For example, you have this panel from chapter 146. Here you can see how Bang attacks with grace, kneeing Garo with his legs in perfect form and one arm defending with the other ready, illustrating in one pose that Bang is a master martial artist. There's a bunch of examples like this, but this one just stood out to me. And then the same can be said for Garo, but with Garo he's got this whole thing where he copies everyone. So at first he does all the martial arts poses, but then he starts copying Watchdog Man, and from that point he starts moving his body like a monster instead of just a person, expressing how he embodies all these different styles and ideals. So, body expression on top of detail and physics is what makes the action in One Punch Man so addicting. Now, we talked about action, we talked about character designs, but we still have one more thing, and that's character poses. This ties into the action with body expression, but it's basically just the way Murata expresses certain things about the characters through their poses. Funny enough, this is another thing Toriyama did really well, like when Frieza does that one pose where he puts his hands out and he's like, "I'm ready when you are," or of course, like any of the attacks in Dragon Ball. Murata, I would say, is a bit more expressive, but obviously not as wacky as someone like Araki. And why I think this is such an important part of the art style is because it does things for the characters that you can't achieve in words. So for example, Saitama has his basic punches. A lot of the time when he does those punches, he barely even uses his body. He kinda just does a jab without even moving his body. So on top of the name Basic Punch, you have Saitama putting the minimum amount of body movement into the punch, expressing through his body that it's about as basic of a punch that you can get. Another character Murata does this really well with is of course Tatsumaki. There's a ton of examples, but one that sticks out to me is this panel of her from chapter 132. Everything about her posture illustrates how she's just floating in the air like a god. Her flowing hair shows how she's overflowing with energy, and the chokehold she has on Psychos illustrates an intimidating sense of power that brings everything together. It's iconic poses like this one that makes so many of One Punch Man's scenes and characters as iconic as they are. And it's because of the poses, along with the action and designs, that make the art style instantly recognizable. The designs perfectly balance the simplicity of old school manga and the detail of hardcore action series in a way that pushes everything to the limit while still offering stylized characters. The action brings those characters to life, representing visceral physics and details, and the expression of the characters through their poses and body movements speaks to readers in ways that you cannot achieve any other way. It's for these three reasons, and probably a bunch more, that One Punch Man has one of the best art styles in all of fiction. But that's it. So, now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you rate the art in One Punch Man? How does it compare to other manga? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my video on Jujutsu Kaisen. In that video, I analyzed Jujutsu Kaisen's artistic evolution. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.